The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated in the darkness between stars like a giant metal flower. Ships of every size and shape came and went from its docking bays every few minutes. Inside the station, thousands of different alien beings walked through the wide corridors going about their business. Jake Murphy sat on the cold metal floor near the entrance to the premium waiting lounge. His clothes were dirty and torn in several places. His boots had holes in them and his hair was messy and unwashed. In his hands he held a small metal cup with a few credits inside. Most people who walked by either ignored him completely or stepped around him like he was garbage. Jake watched as a group of tall, purple-skinned aliens walked toward the premium lounge. Their leader was covered in expensive jewelry that sparkled under the station's lights. His name was Zektar Vorthane, and he was one of the richest beings on his home planet. Behind him walked several servants carrying his bags and belongings. When Zektar saw Jake sitting on the floor, he stopped walking. A cruel smile appeared on his face. He looked down at the human with disgust, then turned to his servants and the other aliens nearby. "Look at this pathetic creature," Zektar said loudly in the common language that most aliens understood. A human begging for credits like some animal. Several other aliens stopped to watch. A group of snake-like beings called serpentines began to hiss with laughter. Some floating see-through aliens called ethereals gathered around to watch the show. "I heard humans are supposed to be intelligent," Zektar continued, getting louder. "But look at this one. Too stupid to even find a job, too lazy to work for his food." Jake kept his head down and said nothing. He seemed to shrink into himself as more aliens gathered around to listen to Zektar's cruel words. "You know what I heard about humans?" Zektar asked his audience. "They used to fight wars with metal sticks and rocks. They killed each other over patches of dirt on their little planet, and now they think they deserve to travel among civilized beings like us." The crowd of aliens laughed and made approving sounds. Some of them started sharing their own stories about how primitive they thought humans were. "My cousin visited Earth once," said one of the serpentines. "He said the whole planet smells like pollution and violence." "I read that they still eat dead animals," added an ethereal. "How barbaric." Zektar was enjoying the attention. He moved closer to Jake, who was still sitting quietly on the floor. "Tell me, human," Zektar said, "what great achievements has your species accomplished? What have you contributed to galactic civilization?" Jake looked up slowly. His eyes met Zektar's for just a moment before he looked down again. He mumbled something too quiet for anyone to hear. "Speak up," Zektar demanded. "We cannot hear your pathetic voice." "I said I am just trying to get home," Jake replied softly. This made the aliens laugh even louder. Zektar clapped his hands together in mock applause. "Trying to get home," he repeated. "Did you hear that? This creature cannot even afford passage on a simple transport ship. Perhaps if humans spent less time fighting each other and more time learning useful skills, they would not end up begging on space stations." A security guard, who was a large alien with 4 arms, walked over to see what was happening. When he saw Jake sitting on the floor, he shook his head in annoyance. "You cannot sit here," the guard told Jake. "This area is for paying customers only." Zektar held up one of his jeweled hands. "Wait," he said to the guard. "Let him stay. I am enjoying this conversation. It is educational to see what happens when inferior species try to join galactic society." The guard shrugged and walked away. He had better things to do than worry about one homeless human. "You see," Zektar said to the crowd, "humans think they can just travel anywhere they want. They think the galaxy owes them something. But what have they earned? What have they proven?" An elderly alien with gray skin and tentacles for arms stepped forward. "I remember when humans first joined the Galactic Council," she said. So arrogant, so sure they had something valuable to offer, but all they brought was violence and chaos. "Exactly," Zektar agreed. "They have been in space for less than 50 years, and already they think they know better than species who have been traveling the stars for thousands of years." Jake shifted slightly on the floor, adjusting his position. As he moved, something small and metallic fell out of his jacket pocket. It rolled across the floor and stopped near Zektar's feet. The alien picked it up and examined it. "What is this?" Zektar asked, holding up the small device. It looked like a simple piece of metal with a few buttons on it. Jake reached out quickly. "Please, can I have that back? It is all I have left." Zektar pulled the device away from Jake's reach. "All you have left? What is it?" "Some primitive human technology." "It is just a tool," Jake said. "It helps me with my work." "Your work?" Zektar laughed. What work? Professional begging? The crowd laughed again. Zektar tossed the device back to Jake, who caught it and quickly put it back in his pocket. I think I have wasted enough time on this entertainment, Zektar announced. Come, let us go to the premium lounge where we belong. Away from the smell of failure. As Zektar and his group started to walk toward the entrance of the premium lounge, the station's lights suddenly began to flicker. A low rumbling sound echoed through the corridors. Some of the aliens looked around nervously. What was that? Asked one of the serpentines. Before anyone could answer, the station's emergency alarms began to blare. Red warning lights flashed on and off along the walls. A voice spoke over the communication system in several different languages. Attention all passengers and crew. This station is under attack. Please remain calm and follow emergency procedures. The aliens who had been laughing at Jake moments before now looked scared and confused. Some of them started running toward the escape pod bays. Others stood frozen, not knowing what to do. Jake slowly stood up from the floor. He looked around at the panicking aliens with calm, calculating eyes. His whole posture seemed to change. He no longer looked like a helpless beggar. He looked like someone who was used to dealing with dangerous situations. Zektar, who was now pale with fear, looked back at Jake. For the first time, he saw something in the human's eyes that made him feel very uncomfortable. It was not fear or desperation. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what to do next. The emergency alarms continued to scream throughout Nexus Prime as explosions rocked the station. Through the large windows, everyone could see massive black ships surrounding the station like hungry wolves. These were Void Reaper vessels, feared throughout the galaxy for their brutal attacks on civilian targets. Zektar stumbled backward as another explosion shook the floor beneath his feet. His expensive jewelry rattled against his purple skin as he tried to keep his balance. Around him, other aliens were running in all directions, screaming and pushing each other as they tried to reach safety. The defense grid is down, shouted the four-armed security guard as he ran past them. All weapons are offline. Jake remained perfectly still in the middle of the chaos. While everyone else panicked, he reached into his worn jacket and pulled out the small device that Zektar had mocked earlier. His fingers moved across its surface with practiced speed, pressing buttons in a specific sequence. Suddenly, Jake walked over to a section of the wall that looked exactly like every other part of the corridor. But when he held his device close to it, a hidden panel slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was a complex array of buttons, screens, and blinking lights that none of the aliens had ever seen before. Zektar watched in confusion as Jake connected his device to the hidden panel. The human's fingers danced across the controls like he had done this 1,000 times before. Strange symbols and numbers began flowing across the small screens. What are you doing? Zektar demanded, his voice shaking with fear. This is no time for your human foolishness. Jake did not answer. Instead, he pressed one final button on his device. Immediately, the air around him began to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot sand. The aliens watching gasped as Jake's appearance started to change before their eyes. His dirty, torn clothes melted away like shadows and were replaced by a crisp military uniform in dark blue and silver. The holes in his boots disappeared, replaced by polished black combat gear. His messy hair straightened into a neat regulation cut. Most shocking of all, gleaming rank pins appeared on his collar that made several aliens step back in recognition. The transformation took only seconds. Where once stood a helpless human beggar, now stood a tall, confident military officer whose uniform bore the insignia of the Terran Defense Force. The rank pins on his collar showed 3 silver stars, the mark of a Commodore. Zektar's mouth fell open. The cruel smile that had been on his face moments earlier was completely gone, replaced by an expression of pure horror. He had not been mocking a beggar at all. He had been humiliating one of the highest-ranking human military officers in the galaxy. Impossible, whispered one of the serpentines. You are Jake Murphy. Commodore Jake Murphy. Jake looked at the alien who had spoken his name. Yes, I am. And right now that is the only thing standing between you and those Void Reaper ships outside. The aliens around him began to murmur among themselves. Even in their panic, they recognized the name. Jake Murphy was famous throughout known space for his tactical brilliance. He was the human who had led the liberation of Kepler 438b, freeing an entire planet from Void Reaper control. He was the officer who had invented new battle strategies that were now taught in military academies across dozens of worlds. But why? Zektar stammered. Why were you disguised as a beggar? Jake was already working at the hidden control panel, his hands moving quickly across the alien technology. Because the Galactic Council refused to listen when we told them these stations were vulnerable to attack. They said human warnings were just paranoia from a primitive species. Another explosion rocked the station, stronger than the ones before. Through the windows, they could see Void Reaper fighters swarming around the docking bays, destroying any ships that tried to escape. So I came here to see for myself, Jake continued as he worked. The disguise let me map every weakness, every security flaw, every hidden access point without anyone paying attention to me. Jake pulled a small communication device from his uniform and spoke into it in rapid military language. Defiance, this is Murphy. Begin approach vector 77 Alpha. Target the flagship first. A voice crackled back through the device. Copy that, Commodore. Captain Bennett here. We have been waiting for your signal. Through the windows, a new shape appeared in the darkness of space. It was massive, easily twice the size of the largest Void Reaper ship. Its hull was painted in the white and blue colors of the Terran Defense Force, with the letters UHS Defiance clearly visible along its side. The aliens watching gasped. They had not known there was a human warship nearby. How long had it been waiting out there, hidden and ready? You planned this, Zektar said, his voice filled with amazement and shame. You knew they were coming. We suspected, Jake replied without looking away from the control panel. Our intelligence networks picked up chatter about attacks on major transit hubs. When we tried to warn the Council, they dismissed our concerns. The hidden panel that Jake was working on suddenly came alive with lights and displays. Information began flowing across screens in dozens of different alien languages. Jake seemed to understand all of them. What is that? Asked the elderly alien with tentacles for arms. Emergency Command Center, Jake explained. Every station like this has one, but they are hidden and can only be accessed by military personnel with the right clearance codes. Jake's fingers continued to work across the controls. The station's automated defenses failed because they were designed by committee, with input from 17 different species. Too many compromised decisions, too many single points of failure. As he spoke, new displays began lighting up around the room. The aliens could see tactical information about the Void Reaper attack, including the positions of all enemy ships and the status of the station systems. But humans, Jake continued, we design our defenses differently. We assume everything will go wrong and we plan for it. Outside, the UHS Defiance had engaged the Void Reaper flagship. Brilliant flashes of energy weapons lit up the darkness as the two massive ships traded fire. But Jake was not just watching the battle. He was controlling it, from his hidden command center. Jake was coordinating not just the human warship, but also activating backup systems throughout the station that the aliens did not even know existed. Emergency barriers slammed down to protect civilian areas. Hidden weapon platforms emerged from concealed positions on the station's hull. You have been here before, Zektar realized. You helped design these systems. 5 years ago, Jake confirmed. When humans were first allowed to contribute to station security, most of our suggestions were ignored, but we were allowed to install a few backup systems. The irony of the situation was not lost on any of the aliens present. The same species they had mocked as primitive and violent was now their only hope for survival. The human they had laughed at was the only one who could save them from the Void Reapers. Jake's communication device crackled again. Commodore, this is Bennett. We have damaged their flagship, but more ships are coming out of hyperspace. Looks like this was a bigger fleet than we expected. Jake's expression grew serious as he looked at the tactical displays. Copy that, Lisa. Begin evacuation procedures for all civilian areas. And tell your Marines to prepare for boarding actions. He turned to face the group of aliens who had been watching him work. His voice was calm but firm when he spoke. I need all of you to help coordinate the evacuation of civilians to the safe zones. Can you do that? Zektar stepped forward, his earlier arrogance completely gone. Yes, he said simply. Tell us what to do. Jake looked at Zektar with steady eyes. There was no anger in his expression, no desire for revenge against the alien who had humiliated him just minutes earlier. Instead, he saw only someone who wanted to help in a desperate situation. Take your people to Section C7, Jake instructed, pointing at a map on one of the displays. There are families with children hiding in the shopping area. They need to be moved to the reinforced shelters on level 15. Zektar nodded quickly. What about the others? He gestured to the serpentines and ethereals who were still standing nearby, looking ashamed of their earlier behavior. Everyone has a job, Jake said, turning to address the whole group. The serpentines can fit through the maintenance tunnels to reach areas that are blocked by debris. The ethereals can pass through walls to check for trapped civilians. Jake's communication device buzzed again. Murphy here. Sir, this is Lieutenant Commander Roberts on the Defiance. We have multiple Void Reaper boarding parties trying to dock with the station. They are targeting the main power core. Jake's fingers flew across the control panel, bringing up new displays showing the station's internal layout. Red dots appeared on the map, showing where enemy forces were trying to break in. Understood, Roberts. I am activating the emergency lockdown protocols. That should slow them down. Throughout the station, heavy blast doors began slamming shut, sealing off critical areas. Emergency force fields activated in the corridors, creating barriers that would force the Void Reapers to take longer routes to their targets. But Jake knew this would only buy them time. The Void Reapers were expert at breaking through defenses, and they had brought enough ships to overwhelm even the station's hidden backup systems. There is something else, Jake said to the aliens around him. The Void Reapers are not just here to destroy the station. They want to capture it intact. Nexus Prime is too valuable as a strategic position. Zektar frowned. How do you know this? Because that is what I would do, Jake replied simply. Which means they will try to take the command center. They will be coming here. The aliens looked around nervously. The hidden command center was deep inside the station. But if the Void Reapers were determined to reach it, they would find a way. Should we evacuate? Asked one of the serpentines. No, Jake said firmly. If they take this room, they can control the entire station. Every life support system, every docking bay, every weapon. We have to hold this position. Jake began pulling weapons from hidden compartments around the room. He handed energy rifles to anyone who could carry them, including Zektar. I have never used one of these, Zektar admitted. Looking at the human weapon uncertainly. Point it at the bad guys and pull the trigger, Jake said. The weapon will do the rest. Outside, the battle between the UHS Defiance and the Void Reaper fleet was intensifying. Through the windows, they could see explosions lighting up space as more ships joined the fight. But Jake's attention was focused on the internal displays showing enemy movements inside the station. They are in Section A12, he reported into his communication device, moving toward the main power conduits. Copy that, sir, came Captain Bennett's voice. We are launching Marine teams to intercept them. But Jake knew the human Marines would have to fight through dozens of levels to reach the Void Reapers. There were not enough of them to be everywhere at once. We need to do something unexpected, Jake muttered to himself as he studied the tactical displays. What do you mean? Zektar asked. Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his face lit up with an idea. The cargo handling system, he said suddenly. Zektar, you said you visited this station many times. Do you know how the automatic cargo loaders work? Zektar nodded. Of course. My ships dock here regularly for trade shipments. Perfect. Jake's fingers began dancing across the controls again. The cargo system uses magnetic launchers to move containers between ships in the station. But if we reverse the polarity and overload the power cores, understanding dawned on Zektar's face. You want to turn them into weapons. Exactly. We can launch cargo containers at the Void Reaper ships like massive bullets. Jake began reprogramming the station's cargo handling computers. It was incredibly complex work, requiring him to override dozens of safety systems and redirect enormous amounts of power. This is insane, said one of the ethereals. Those systems were not designed for combat. That is what makes it perfect, Jake replied. The Void Reapers will never see it coming. As Jake worked, alarms began sounding throughout the station. The enemy boarding parties were getting closer to critical systems. On the displays, they could see Void Reaper troops moving through the corridors in organized formations. There, Jake said finally, pressing a large red button on the control panel. Cargo launchers are now under manual control. He switched his communication device to a new frequency. Defiance, this is Murphy. Prepare to coordinate fire with station-based projectiles. Station-based projectiles? Captain Bennett's voice sounded confused. Sir, all weapon systems are offline. Not all of them, Jake said with a grim smile. On the displays, they could see the station's cargo bays opening. Massive containers filled with trade goods began moving into the launch tubes. But instead of being loaded onto ships, they were being aimed at the Void Reaper vessels. Firing solution locked, Jake announced. All ships clear the firing lanes. He pressed another button and the first container shot out from the station like a bullet from a gun. It moved so fast that it appeared as just a streak of light crossing the space between the station and the nearest Void Reaper ship. The container struck the enemy vessel with the force of a meteor. The ship's shields flared and failed under the impact, and the container punched straight through the hull. The Void Reaper ship began spinning out of control, atmosphere streaming from the massive hole in its side. "Direct hit," came Captain Bennett's excited voice over the radio. "That was brilliant, sir." Jake was already loading the next container. "This is just the beginning. We have about 200 containers in storage." The aliens around him watched in amazement as Jake turned a peaceful space station into a fortress. Container after container shot out at the attacking ships, each one hitting with devastating force. But the Void Reapers were not giving up. More boarding parties were fighting their way through the station's corridors, and their ships were spreading out to avoid the cargo launcher attacks. "Sir," came Lieutenant Commander Roberts' voice over the radio, "enemy forces have reached level 20. They are only 5 levels away from your position." Jake nodded grimly. "Understood. All civilian evacuation teams report status." One by one, the alien volunteers reported in. Zektar and his team had successfully moved hundreds of families to safety. The Serpentines had rescued people trapped in collapsed areas. The Ethereals had guided lost civilians through blocked passages. "Excellent work, everyone," Jake said. "Now get to the safe zones yourselves. This is about to become very dangerous." But Zektar shook his head. "No, we are staying here with you." "This is not your fight," Jake told him. "Yes, it is," Zektar replied firmly. "You could have left us to die after the way we treated you. Instead, you chose to protect us. Now we choose to stand with you." The other aliens nodded in agreement. Even though they were terrified, they were not going to abandon the human who had saved their lives. The sound of explosions was getting closer. Through the command center's displays, Jake could see Void Reaper soldiers fighting their way through the station's corridors. Their black armor made them look like walking nightmares, and their energy weapons cut through the station's defenses like they were made of paper. "They will be here in 10 minutes, Jake said calmly as he continued launching cargo containers at the enemy ships outside. Each container that hit caused massive damage, but there were still too many Void Reaper vessels for him to destroy them all. Zektar checked his energy rifle for the 3rd time. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "What is the plan when they arrive?" Jake glanced at the station's layout on his displays. "We make them fight for every meter. The command center has 3 entrance points. We set up defensive positions at each one and force them to come at us through narrow choke points." He pointed to different areas on the map. "Zektar, take 2 of the Serpentines and cover the main entrance. The Ethereals can phase through the walls and attack from unexpected angles. Everyone else spread out and use the cover of the control panels." "What about you?" asked the elderly alien with tentacles. "I stay here," Jake said, gesturing to the central command console. "If I leave this position, we lose control of the cargo launchers and the defensive systems." Another explosion shook the command center. This one was much closer than the others. "Level 18, Jake reported into his communication device. "They just blasted through the security doors." Captain Bennett's voice crackled back through the radio. "Commodore, we are launching all available Marines to support you, but it will take at least 15 minutes for them to fight through to your position." "Copy that," Jake replied. "We will hold until then." But privately, Jake was not sure they could last 15 minutes. The Void Reapers were some of the most dangerous fighters in the galaxy, and his small group of volunteers had almost no combat experience. "Listen carefully," Jake said to the aliens around him. "The Void Reapers are going to try to intimidate you. They will shout threats and make terrifying noises. Do not let them get inside your heads. Focus on your targets and keep firing." Zektar nodded and moved toward the main entrance with his team. The Serpentines slithered through the maintenance ducts to reach their positions. The Ethereals began to fade in and out of visibility as they prepared to move through the walls. Jake turned back to his controls and launched another cargo container. This one struck a Void Reaper cruiser directly in its engine section, causing a massive explosion that lit up the space around the station. "That is their command ship," he said with satisfaction. "Without it, their coordination will be much worse." Suddenly, the lights in the command center flickered and went out. Emergency lighting bathed everything in a red glow. On his displays, Jake could see that the Void Reapers had cut the main power lines. Switching to backup power, he announced. The displays came back online, but they were dimmer than before. Then they heard it, the sound of energy weapons firing in the corridors outside. The Void Reapers had reached their level. Here they come, Zektar called out from his position near the main entrance. The first enemy soldiers appeared at the far end of the corridor. They moved in perfect formation, their black armor gleaming under the emergency lights. When they saw the barricaded entrance to the command center, they immediately took cover and began firing. Energy bolts flew back and forth across the corridor. Zektar and the Serpentines returned fire from behind their barricades, but they were clearly outmatched. "The Void Reapers had better weapons and more experience. We cannot hold them," one of the Serpentines shouted over the noise of the battle. Jake continued working at his console while the fight raged around him. He launched another container, then another. Each successful hit outside meant fewer enemy ships to worry about later. Suddenly, one of the ethereals appeared next to him, materializing out of thin air. "More enemies coming through the side passages," the alien reported. "They found alternate routes," Jake nodded. He had expected this. "Fall back to secondary positions. Make them work for every meter." The fighting spread throughout the command center as Void Reaper soldiers forced their way through all three entrances. The aliens fought bravely, but they were being pushed back toward the central console where Jake was working. "Sir," Zektar called out. "I am hit." Jake glanced over to see the purple-skinned alien clutching his arm. Green blood was seeping through his fingers, but he was still firing his weapon with his other hand. "Medical kit in the storage compartment behind you," Jake told him without stopping his work at the console. A Void Reaper soldier appeared suddenly at Jake's left, having broken through the ethereal defensive line. The enemy raised his weapon to fire, but Jake was faster. Without looking away from his controls, he drew a sidearm and fired 3 shots. The Void Reaper dropped to the floor. "How did you do that?" gasped one of the Serpentines who had seen the encounter. "Practice," Jake replied simply, holstering his weapon and returning to the console. The battle was not going well. The aliens were brave, but they were not soldiers. The Void Reapers were systematically destroying their defensive positions and moving closer to the central console. Jake made a difficult decision. He activated a new sequence on his controls, and suddenly all the lights in the command center went out completely. The room was plunged into total darkness. "What happened?" Zektar's voice called out in the blackness. "I shut down all non-essential systems," Jake explained, "including the lights. But the good news is that I can see in the dark a lot better than they can." Jake had activated his military night vision implants, a piece of technology that allowed human soldiers to see clearly, even in complete darkness. Around him he could hear the Void Reapers stumbling and calling out to each other in confusion. "Stay low and do not move," Jake whispered to his alien allies. "Let me handle this." Moving silently through the darkened room, Jake became a ghost. The Void Reapers could not see him, but he could see them perfectly. One by one, he eliminated the enemy soldiers with precise shots. When he finally turned the lights back on 5 minutes later, a dozen Void Reaper bodies lay scattered around the command center. The alien stared at Jake in amazement. "Incredible," Zektar whispered. "I have never seen anything like that." Jake was already back at his console, checking the status displays. "The immediate threat is neutralized, but more are coming. And we have a bigger problem." He pointed to one of the screens which showed the battle outside the station. "Their flagship is still operational, and it is moving into position to bombard the station directly." The massive Void Reaper command ship was indeed positioning itself for a devastating attack. Its main weapons were charging up with energy that would be enough to crack the station's hull like an eggshell. "Can the Defiance stop it?" asked one of the ethereals. Jake shook his head. "Captain Bennett's ship is damaged and outnumbered. She's doing everything she can, but it is not enough." Jake stared at the tactical display for a long moment, thinking. Then his face lit up with another desperate idea. "The station's fusion reactor," he said suddenly. "If I can overload it at just the right moment." "You want to blow up the station?" Zektar asked in horror. "Not blow it up," Jake corrected. "Create a controlled fusion pulse. It's like a giant flashbang grenade. It will temporarily blind all the Void Reaper ships and disable their electronics. And if you get the timing wrong," Jake was already working at the controls, accessing the station's power core systems. Then we all die. But if I do nothing, we die anyway. His fingers flew across the console as he began the incredibly complex process of turning a space station's power source into a weapon. It required precise calculations and perfect timing. "Defiance, this is Murphy," he said into his communication device. "In exactly 3 minutes, I need you to get as far away from the station as possible." "Sir?" Captain Bennett's voice sounded confused. "Trust me, Lisa. 3 minutes. Mark." Jake initiated the fusion pulse sequence and watched as warning alarms began flashing all across his displays. The station's reactor was building up energy far beyond its normal operating levels. The countdown timer on Jake's display showed 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Around him, the aliens watched nervously as warning lights flashed and alarms blared throughout the command center. The station's fusion reactor was building up energy at dangerous levels. "Are you sure about this?" Zector asked, his voice tight with worry. Jake's hands moved steadily across the controls, making tiny adjustments to the fusion pulse calculations. "No," he admitted. "But it is our only chance." Through the windows, they could see the massive Void Reaper flagship moving closer to the station. Its main weapons were almost fully charged, and energy was building up along its hull like captured lightning. 2 minutes, Jake announced. Captain Bennett's voice crackled over the communication device. "Commodore, we are moving to minimum safe distance as ordered." "But sir, what exactly are you planning?" "Something that will either save us all or kill us all," Jake replied. "I will know which in about 90 seconds. The aliens in the command center had stopped talking. They watched Jake work with a mixture of fear and admiration. This human, who they had mocked as a primitive beggar just hours earlier, was now their only hope for survival. 1 minute, Jake called out. On the displays, they could see more Void Reaper ships moving into attack position. The enemy commander had decided to end this battle quickly with overwhelming firepower. In 60 seconds, they would unleash enough energy to tear the station apart. 30 seconds. Jake's finger hovered over the final activation button. If he pressed it too early, the pulse would not be strong enough to disable the enemy ships. If he pressed it too late, the Void Reapers would destroy the station before the pulse could take effect. 15 seconds. The Void Reaper flagship's main weapons were fully charged now. Through the windows, they could see the energy building up to deadly levels. 10 seconds. Jake watched his calculations one final time, checking and rechecking the numbers. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now! Jake slammed his hand down on the activation button. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the entire station began to vibrate with a deep, powerful hum. The lights flickered as enormous amounts of energy flowed through the station's systems toward the fusion reactor. Suddenly, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the station's core. It was brighter than a star, brighter than anything the aliens had ever seen. The pulse of energy expanded outward in all directions, washing over the Void Reaper fleet like a wave. When the light faded, every Void Reaper ship was drifting helplessly in space. Their weapons were dead, their engines were offline, and their communication systems were silent. The electromagnetic pulse had fried every piece of electronic equipment on their vessels. "It worked," Zector whispered in amazement. Jake was already on his communication device. "Defiance, this is Murphy. All enemy ships are disabled. Begin capture operations immediately. Copy that, sir," Captain Bennett's excited voice replied. "That was incredible. How did you know it would work?" "I did not," Jake admitted. "But sometimes you have to take calculated risks." Over the next several hours, human Marines from the UHS Defiance boarded and captured every Void Reaper ship in the fleet. The pirates who had terrorized this part of the galaxy for years were finally defeated. As the immediate danger passed, rescue teams arrived to help with repairs and medical treatment. Zector's injured arm was treated by human medics who showed no resentment about his earlier behavior. While the station systems were being restored, Jake found himself sitting in the same spot where he had posed as a beggar earlier that day. But now he was wearing his full military uniform, and aliens from dozens of different species were coming to thank him personally. Zector approached him, walking slowly because of his bandaged arm. The purple-skinned alien sat down next to Jake without asking permission. "I owe you an apology," Zector said quietly. "More than an apology. I owe you my life." Jake looked at him with calm eyes. "You do not owe me anything. I was doing my job." "No," Zector insisted. "You could have let us die. After the way I mocked you, after the cruel things I said, you had every right to protect only your own people and leave us to face the Void Reapers alone." Jake was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "You did not mock a beggar today, Zektar. You mocked someone you did not understand. But the real shame is not that you judged me by my appearance. The real shame is that you would have treated an actual beggar the same way." Zektar felt his face burn with embarrassment. "You are right. I have spent my life looking down on others based on their wealth, their species, their social status. I thought I was better than everyone else. And now?" Jake asked. "Now I realize that worth is not measured by the clothes someone wears or the credits in their account," Zektar replied. "It is measured by what they do when others need help." Jake nodded. "That is a good lesson to learn." Other aliens began gathering around them. The Serpentines who had fought beside Jake in the command center, the Ethereals who had helped evacuate civilians, and many others who had witnessed the day's events. "Commodore Murphy," said the elderly alien with tentacles, "I want to apologize as well. We all do. Our species have spent too long dismissing humans as primitive and violent. But today we learned something important," added one of the Serpentines. "Humans do not fight because they are violent. They fight to protect others." Jake stood up and looked at the diverse group of aliens around him. "I hope this experience teaches all of us something valuable. We should judge others by their actions, not by their appearance or their species. There is strength in diversity and wisdom in working together." News of the battle at Nexus Prime spread quickly throughout the galaxy. Within days, the Galactic Council called an emergency session to discuss new security measures for civilian stations. For the first time, they asked human military advisors to take leading roles in the planning. Zektar used his wealth and influence to fund new cultural exchange programs between species. He wanted to make sure that the kind of prejudice he had shown would become a thing of the past. 6 months later, Jake returned to Nexus Prime for the dedication ceremony of the new Interspecies Defense Center. He arrived in full dress uniform this time, greeted with honors by representatives from dozens of worlds. But after the formal ceremony was over, Jake found himself back in the same corridor where this had all begun. He sat down in the exact spot where he had once posed as a beggar, looking out at the busy station around him. Zektar found him there, just as Jake had expected he would. The alien no longer wore expensive jewelry or ostentatious robes. Instead, he dressed simply and carried himself with quiet dignity. "I come here sometimes," Zektar said as he sat down beside Jake, "to remember." "Remember what?" Jake asked. "That everyone has value," Zektar replied. "That you cannot judge a person's worth by looking at them. That true nobility comes from helping others, not from birth or wealth." Around them, the station bustled with activity. Beings from hundreds of different species walked through the corridors, working together, trading together, living together in peace. The command center that had once been hidden was now clearly marked and staffed by representatives from many worlds. "Do you think it will last?" Zektar asked. "This cooperation between our species?" Jake watched a group of young aliens from different worlds playing together near a viewing window. "As long as we remember that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. As long as we choose to see the best in each other instead of looking for reasons to feel superior. And if we forget, then someone will remind us," Jake said with a small smile. "Maybe when we least expect it." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the galaxy go about its business around them. The human who had once been mocked as a beggar, and the alien who had learned the true meaning of respect, united by the understanding that everyone deserves dignity and compassion. In the distance, through the great windows of Nexus Prime, stars continued to shine in the darkness, each one representing worlds where beings were learning to live together in peace. And in a small way, the events of one day at a space station had helped make that peace a little more possible.